Hi, welcome to the orgdev podcast. So what does it take to deliver on an ambitious strategy, especially in a mission-driven organization where the stakes are high and capacity is limited? How do you align people, processes, and systems to deliver on the organization's ambitions? We're absolutely delighted to be joined by Maria Fares today, who's currently the Director of Organisational Development and Employee Experience at Cancer Research UK, where she leads work on organisation development, leadership, and talent, EDI, employee experience, and building change capability across the charity. Maria's focus is on enabling the organisation to align its people, process, and systems, deliver on ambitious strategies, and ultimately accelerate the progress in beating cancer. Maria's had a fascinating career with over 20 years' experience in organisational development, HR, and change leadership, and she's worked across multiple sectors from local government to global banks and international non-profits. Throughout her career, Maria specialised in helping organisations navigate complexity, aligning systems thinking with practical interventions that drive real results through individuals, and along the way has gained a deep appreciation of how culture and context shape organisation effectiveness. Of course, working in an organisation like this, Maria is driven by purpose and chooses to work in organisations where her contribution has a positive impact on the wider community. Originally from Spain, Maria has lived and worked in several countries, and outside of work, Maria is a busy mother of three very active boys, a teenager, a preteen, and a 10-year-old who thinks he's already grown up, who keeps her grounded, energized, and constantly on her toes. So thank you so much for making time for us, Maria. We really appreciate it. We're really looking forward to the conversation.
Maria, it's lovely to have you with us. So just to kick us off, just tell us a bit more about the work you do. What does organisation development look like for you in the role that you're in currently?
So, as you know, organizational development means very different things for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
So the way I use it, the way I approach it is enabling me to translate the strategy of the organization, what it really means for people's processes and systems, and then work on aligning those elements. It is when you align those elements that then you get that elusive concept culture. And when you really start using all those levers in the organization to enable that delivery. So that's what I do and what I do in cancer research. So it's working with, at the moment, we are developing the next 3-year business plan based on a very ambitious strategy, or a 10-year strategy. So what is the next chunk that we need to develop? And then based on that, we're looking around how we're going to make it happen. So I don't decide what needs to happen. That is for those that are very clever working around me. What I do is working with them and then say, well, if that's where you want to go, what does it mean? Who do you need? What do you need them to do? How do you need them to behave? What processes and systems are you going to put in place to enable them to do what you need them to do? And then that's where the fun starts.
And they're really important questions, aren't they? And they don't always get asked in organisations. The strategy gets developed and then it's kind of there. But those really important questions about who do you need to do it? How are we going to do it? Just don't get asked. So that's a really important role for OD to play, do you think?
Absolutely. And I think for me, that's the main shift between having a function that focuses maybe on learning and development only or change only, is when you bring all that, you ask that question, so what? Why is it important that we do this? What is the impact you need to achieve? That impact needs to be aligned to the strategy. That is where your contribution, your value comes. This day and age, with all the constraints and pressures, I think more than ever, we have to prove that value day in, day out. The only way you can do that is if you have a very clear link. If you want to do that, you need this, and this is how I'm going to help you get there. Otherwise, everything else becomes a nice to have, which are the first things that are cut when you get all those pressures.
There's something, isn't there, about OD practitioners really asking questions to understand the strategy and being confident to work with senior leaders in terms of having those conversations, because sometimes they can be quite challenging.
Absolutely. And for me, sometimes I define my role as a translator. Yeah. So as I said, I don't set the strategy. I contribute as any of the senior managers in the organization. The directors come together, but I don't make those decisions. That is for executive board, the trustees to refine. Yeah. So then my job then comes to let me help you translate that. Is that translation exercise that sometimes is missing? And then you have a big gap, isn't it, between your strategy and all the things you put it in place in your business plan, those people initiatives that you put in place. They're not wrong, but you haven't answered why these ones instead of those ones. There are always 1,000 things we could do in the people field. There are always a new training, a new program, new employee experience initiative, new approach. Why those ones and not these ones? So I have to be able to defend the use of resources, the effort, the focus. The only way you do that is by doing that translation. You have to close that gap. And it's not easy. And for me, it's a space that is not usually occupied. And even with OD practitioners, they focus sometimes a lot on the initiative itself. And they put a lot of effort, isn't it, on designing the initiative, on delivering it. And when you look at it, it's really well designed and supported. But when you look beyond it, what's the impact, how it is aligned, why you're doing this and not that, falls flat sometimes. So I do believe organizational development really needs to start occupying that translation space a bit more to ensure that whatever it is we do, it has a strong rationale.
You describe yourself as you kind of deliberately chosen to work in purpose-driven organisations. What are the particular challenges? So, I've worked in purpose-driven organisations. You've got a really strong mission, but inevitably you've got limited capacity and resources. What's different about doing an OD in those types of environments?
The drive or the need to really focus on what's important, the priority is so critical. Normally, purposeless organizations, they're what I call boundaryless. There's always something more that you could do because the mission is so big. If you were to do just that one more thing, that one more relationship, that one more partnership, that one more fundraising, that's the key. Yeah. So you keep pushing and pushing, and it's so easy then to really do too much, trying to be all things for all people instead of really focusing on what's going to make the biggest difference, they're going to have the biggest impact. So in purpose-led organizations, those organizations that have those constraints, but the mission is so big, identifying, clarifying, being really sure about your role, your unique contribution, and then what it is that you can do within that space is absolutely critical. So organizational development, supporting that conversation, challenging when needed, asking the questions, helping them identify that so what, it's so important because, there's so many things we could do to try to end cancer quicker. If only we had the money, if only we had the time, if only we had the people. But that's not going to happen.
And there's risk of spreading everybody too thin, isn't there, if you try and do too many things and then you don't achieve anything. Yeah.
The other, I think, challenge with purpose-led organizations is, so we have this very elusive thing that private organizations are looking for, which is that purpose. Yeah. You have one that people can connect, not only connect, but they own it. They live for it. It's part of their own mission. So they interiorize it. Brilliant. Fantastic. A lot of private organizations will pay a lot of money, or they're paying a lot of money to try to find that. We have that. We don't have to fight for that. What happens is sometimes individuals see the organization as a vehicle for them to deliver that contribution, which means that sometimes misalignment happens and the things they believe are going to make the difference may not be the ones the organization have identified as the critical priorities. And then what happens is you get that situation where individuals may feel you don't have the autonomy to do your job because somebody is stopping you, or you are not performing well because you're spread so thin, or it's difficult to align priorities across the organization because everybody's doing different things. So that is a shadow side that happens sometimes, and you have to be quite careful to navigate it because you don't want to squash that autonomy, that empowerment. That's the energy that you have in not-for-profit organizations, purpose-led organizations. But at the same time, that clarity, that alignment, that direction has to be more clear than ever. And that sometimes is a challenge for our senior leaders. So we really need to work with them to help them build that coherent narrative, ensure that direction is clearly stated, work with them in terms of finding the right balance between autonomy and control, between empowerment and that alignment. So it's a very rich space to work with, but it's not all rosy all the time.
So Maria, I've got so many questions. I guess for viewers, we're in 86 countries. In the UK, Cancer UK is a very iconic organisation. It's touched and positively impacted a lot of people. Just for the people watching, could you just give us a little idea of the scale and scope? This is not a small group of volunteers shaking tins on a Saturday morning, is it?
No, not at all. So cancer research, the mission is to support everybody to live free from the fear of cancer. Yeah, to live better lives. Yeah, free from the fear of cancer. What that means is it focuses on funding vital research from all the way from prevention, detection, treatment, and cure. And it's a really ambitious organization. I think committed to in the next 2 to 3 years to reach up to £1.5 billion on funded research. So it is really large scale. And there's been a report published recently about the state of cancer care in the UK and impact. Half of the medications that are used to treat cancer in the UK is funded by the NHS have been touched by cancer research. So it is quite an impressive organization. Now, in order to fund that research, yes, we do have fundraising activities, and those are through mass events, through retail, our charity shops, very important for us, superstores, etc., online presence, but also a growing philanthropic approach to channel some of that wealth that is at the moment in the world, focusing on that research or supporting the researchers of the future, or focusing on venture capital to commercialize some of the drugs, or brokering children's and young people's cancer care, which is not very commercially viable. So there's not much research done in it. So cancer research has a unique place to really convene people and broker that improvement. So it does a huge range of activities to ensure that we have the right funding for our researchers.
Thank you for that, because I think it's really useful for people watching, because it just shows when you're trying to operationalize the strategy, it's true complexity, isn't it? And I guess some of the things I was thinking about when you sort of said your role in terms of taking the strategy and helping people translate it, it's the intersection of so many things, isn't it? You've got strategic ambition, new initiatives, but you've also got a huge business as usual operation going on as well, and strategy goes in on the top. So how do you work with the organization? Like, how do you convene or work with people to help them make sense of it and work their way through it?
That is a challenge. That is a challenge in any organization, where you have to find that right balance between your run and then your change. Yeah. So your business as usual, you keeping your lights on, keeping the business ticking, but then you have all these very ambitious transformation initiatives that are going to make a difference. But as an organization, we don't have that many resources, isn't it, to support BAU while putting them to do the change. And it is a challenge, and it's one that we face in head on. My role there in cancer research is twofold. One is really helping with that, moving from the operational here now people planning towards the more middle to longer term, to help the organization understand that when we talk about individual development, leadership management, culture, behavior change, all those things take time. So anything you start doing now is going to have an impact maybe in 18 months. So if you're doing anything now because you have a need now, then you are 18 months late. So you need to start identifying and putting things in place. So in 18 months, when you really need it, is ready. Otherwise, all those remedial things that you put in place, too little, too late. So that's one thing, helping to balance that and to bring that. The second thing is to really strengthening the people side of change management in the organization. So the organization has a strong kind of change delivery focus, but the people side of change wasn't as strong as it could be. So really helping understand the value, why it's so important, what are the different approaches. So for example, the sponsor, so very strong on the executive side of sponsoring and making decisions, governance plans, brilliant. Okay, but you need this other side, which is your people side of sponsoring. How are you going to explain your why? How are you going to bring people with you? How are you going to constantly communicate and be engaged? That bit needed a bit of strengthening. So we are working there. So we can then start shifting that balance between run and change, strengthening the side of change so it can be done more effectively. And you can start showing the impact of all those transformation initiatives.
Wow, I love that kind of 18 months from now. So it's always sort of future focused almost, isn't it, in everything?
It has to be. Now, absolutely, there are things that you can do to support the here and now. But to support the here and now is more around performance aids. So the things that you can quickly access to have better conversations, to address issues, to, give you some models, etc., that you can apply. And I'm not underestimating how important those are. But if you're looking at kind of improving management capability, developing new leadership skills, if you're talking about new ways of working, you're talking about cultural behavioral change, that it doesn't matter how good we are, it's not going to happen because you put in place one training program. That is something that is longer term. And because you need consistency and you need to keep repeating and focusing on those things you want to develop, that means that you need to have a very clear plan, those 18 months, where you're going to get, because you're going to need to keep repeating and aligning messages and putting in place interventions that they all point to the same thing. If you want this leadership behavior, then everything has to point to that, because it's going to take time for that to have the impact. So yeah, if you try to do that now because you have a problem now, you're late.
And you touched on something really important there, isn't it? Because in the lifetime of that 18 months, a lot of stuff happens, doesn't it? And other priorities emerge as well. And often, just as you're starting to reap the benefits of the 18-month program, often there's pressure to change direction and move on to other things. How do you maintain discipline as an organization, as a function, to sort of follow these things through to completion?
Well, I haven't found the trick yet. If I do, I'll let you know.
Damn.
I think if I had the trick, I will probably be much more wealthy than I'm currently am. But I think the important bit is to have that bigger strategic framework. What I mean is, if you have the impact clear, and that is an impact that has that very strong anchoring on the organizational strategy, you may shift how you're going to get there, but is that direction that provides you, that will allow you to flex and adapt without losing your direction. But if you don't have that, if you just have interventions, then when something happens, you stop this one and then you do this one. So this one is just halfway because you didn't have that anchor. That's why for me it's so important. So working with the team, for example, in the past, it may have been, you need to put in place training for Gen AI because Gen AI is here and everybody wants to do it. Okay, no problem. That's a need. We're going to meet it. But that Gen AI training is part of digital capability. So yes, we're going to deliver, but we're then going to be able to explain how does this fit with the whole direction of traveling around digital transformation and how it's going to help you and how then it links with this next priority, which is around cybersecurity. And then it's going to help us link to the next priority, which is we are implementing Salesforce. So how are we going to help that? And then it links with the next priority, which is we now have Windows 11. All those things are coming. But if you have that clarity, that framework, then you can build a narrative, you can align programs, you can identify opportunities to reinforce the message, be consistent, coherent. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to attend what's coming. Absolutely. But you can put it in a much better perspective and help people understand how things connect, not just random activities.
Oh my gosh. if you're watching this at home, rewind that bit again, because that is the ticket, isn't it? It's on a number of different reasons. And I guess because people can commit to an intervention, but if it doesn't get followed through and it just doesn't get ended, it just another one comes along, you soon get like fads come along, don't you? And less engagement. So people can relate it to the bigger picture. I guess the thing I was just wondering though, as you were sort of saying, is you're kind of filling in a missing piece in a lot of strategies, isn't it? Where strategies kind of look at the what and possibly even the why, but they don't necessarily link and they don't articulate the capabilities that are required to deliver on that. So is that a missing piece of the strategy that you come in to help organizations articulate?
Absolutely. And is one of the biggest shifts that I normally have to work with organizations around. So when you're talking about capability, what I'm talking is about developing three things. So one is the practice. Yeah. And for that, I need to work with the capability owners. I don't have the content, the technical expertise. They do. So I approach them and I ask, in order for you to deliver your strategic agenda, who needs to know what in the organization? What do you need them to do with that what? So I help them define, shape the capability. Let's put, for example, data. Yeah. So I go and work with those that are trying to make the shift in data and improve that and say, okay, so what out of data is a huge field, isn't it? So out of data, for your agenda to be delivered, what skills, what knowledge do you need people to have so you can deliver what you have to deliver? So we put that in a framework. Okay. That's the practice. Then you have to be able to develop the skills you need for that practice. Yeah. And those skills, then that's your training. Yeah, but that training is linked to your framework, to that shape of the capability. It's not just random programs. There's a structure. And you probably going to have different levels for different audiences in the organization, but you can explain how they link, how they work together to deliver the impact. And then you have the third element, which is, okay, for that practice and those skills to work in the way you need to work, what are the conditions that need to be in the organization for that capability to work in the way you need it to work? And here we talk about your governance, your resource allocation, your leadership, all the things that people bucket in that culture, elusive concept. Those are the conditions. So working with them to try to identify what do we need to shift, what do we need to shape for your capability to work in the way you need it to deliver your strategic agenda. And therefore, then suddenly you move from having a conversation around, I need an introduction to data training, to this is what I need the organization to be able to do with data, working in this way. These are the type of skills they're going to need to develop. And this is how we need to govern. And this is the leadership we need to make it happen. So you have shift the conversation to that place where you need it to be for that longer term instead of the here and now.
This is quickly becoming a textbook episode. So if you, again, rewind it.
So good.
If anybody's watching this and you do a combined role of learning and organisation development, which we're seeing more of, this is kind of like a blended approach, isn't it? Which is it's conditions, capability, but all in context as well.
Absolutely. As I said, it's not easy. Also, that concept of capability ownership, I found it quite interesting in organizations. I had to spend quite a bit of time convincing that group of individuals that they are the owners, they are the experts. Therefore, they should want to shape their capability. They should be able to say, this is the type of data capability this organization needs, and this is why it needs it, and this is how it needs to happen. And that kind of moves that responsibility around that learning and development from being owned by a central team to actually be shared across the organizations. The central team has a role. We know about adult learning. I know very little about data. You know about data, may not know much about adult learning. Well, let's work together, let's partner so we can bring the best approach.
Hi, we're just pausing this interview for a moment. Have you ever finished an episode of the OrgDev podcast and wish you had a cheat sheet that summarises all of the key points? Us too, so we made one. It's called From Pod to Practice, and each week in our newsletter we'll share a 2-page summary of the latest OrgDev episode, and it includes key takeaways, a reflection prompt, and one small action you can try.
And it's all in a digital format with space at the end to add your own notes and reflections, and it's designed to help you take the learning from the podcast into your day-to-day work. So to get your copy, just sign up to our Next Step to Better newsletter, the link's in the show notes, or you can visit our website at www.distinction.live to get the latest from pod to practice in your inbox. And let us know what you think. We'd love to get your feedback.
You've got a highly developed perspective on how organizations work, because you can almost see inside your brain at the moment, like how it all fits together and the big picture as well. So we're really curious, like, what was your journey into OD, and how has your experience sort of shaped your view as you've come into cancer research?
Well, I started working in OD before even I knew there was something called OD, but just happened. So in Spain, when I was in university, I joined this organization called ISEC, which is an international student-led organization that wants to develop leadership in young people so they can basically go and change the world. Yeah. So you start working with them as a volunteer. And then if you're interested, you want to continue developing, then you can get on leadership positions with the organization at a national, international level, because it's present in more than 100 countries. So it's an international organization. But the characteristic of this organization is that for those leadership positions, you have to be elected. So you need to present your proposal, your application, and then the members need to elect you, which means that you have to be able to have a vision, articulate it, sell it to others, convince them that that's the vision, and then you have to make it happen. And you have 1 year, because your term is only 1 year. After the 1 year, you can rerun for a second time, but that's it. That's the limit. So imagine an organization full of young people, very idealistic, that want to change the world, where leadership changes, like 100% turnover leadership every single year. So new energy, new ideas, new drive, where you are not really risking much because you're still a student. So you don't have a mortgage. You don't have, it's not your job. You're not dealing with an organization, millions, that you can lose. So it's a relatively risk-free environment for you to go and just strain. So the best experiential leadership development opportunity you could ever have. So that's where I started my training. That's where I started working. And I had the opportunity to work across different countries. And there I started to work with, my last role with them was to work as a coach for the leadership teams in the different countries, where they had maybe some challenges, like internal challenge, not having enough leadership pipeline going through, or not enough membership, or things. So work with them to put in place the strategies to support it. So that is where I started working, as I said, in that organizational development space without knowing that that's how it was called. But for me, it was that sweet spot of individual potential and organizational impact, and how could you bring those things together? And because when you bring it together, it's where you have individuals that can thrive, but also organizations that can succeed, because you need both. And so started working there. Then I spent 1 year in Uganda doing an internship with PricewaterhouseCoopers in the area of HR, contracts and things like that. Enough for me to know I didn't like that. So being there, done that, that's okay. I then moved to the Netherlands and I worked there for International Bank for 3 years. Learned a lot, did a lot of work around harmonizing, standardizing processes and policies. So learned a lot about that kind of systemic approach to those policies and processes whilst maintaining the cultural differences because of the countries and how things land differently. And then after 3 years, left bank because identified that actually I needed something more than just a paycheck to wake me up in the morning. So moved to the UK, started working for local government here, and start bringing that approach around moving from just learning and development to organizational development. So how can you use all the different levers to really move organizations? So how do you need to design your performance management, your leadership and management, your talent? So all of that is aligned and contributes to the same direction, and they're not just going all the different ways. I then worked for an international NGO for 6 years, then went back to local government, and I'm now in cancer research. So that was my introduction to OD. I just happened to find the space where I could, as I said, work with individuals and organizations at the same time, which I think is the best space ever to work.
What a lovely varied experience you've had. And how do you think your thinking around OD's evolved over your career? What did you used to believe, or kind of what were your perspectives that have shifted?
I think when I started, I had a more kind of naive expectation that you will find the answer. There will be one right way of doing things. You only had to know the right model, the right framework, the right tool resource applied, and then magically things would happen. I have learned that is quite the opposite. So that shifted then for me to try to learn as many tools, models, frameworks as possible to really build my toolbox. So then you can contextualize and apply, bring a bit of this, a bit of that, and then depending on the organization. So I think that's one big learning. Second learning is you really need to meet the organization where the organization is. I have a challenge with that sometimes. My ambition, sometimes it's a little bit higher to where the organization is, so it takes me a while to work with the stakeholders and kind of bring them in. I remember early in my career, I had a really wonderful manager, and she was telling me that one of my challenges was that I went from A to Z, like quickly, and I had it very clear. But I wasn't bringing people with me, and some people needed that kind of sequence and the steps and understand if we do this, then that will happen and happen. It's almost like learning a new language. Is one that I'm still learning. So yeah, that shifted. And then I think the last one is around perseverance, like in this field. It's not that if you're not convinced on the work you're doing and the value, it's quite easy to feel discouraged. Sometimes that longer term perspective really is pushed aside because in the here and now you have so many fires now from our colleagues in HR, but also across the organization. So you really have to be very perseverant. But what's the word? You have to persevere a lot to keep with that direction, that keep aligning and building while you're dealing with the fires here and now. You get quite a few setbacks because also in this field, I'm not sure if you've found it, but I found quite often that a lot of senior leaders believe they are experts in leadership development and management development and cultural change. And you are there just to be a safe pair of hands, yeah, instead of really listening to the professional expertise. So you have to persevere. You have to find different ways. You have to really be on top of those influencing skills, and it's not that easy. So I think those will be the three main lessons.
And have you got any tools or kind of
I was going to ask that question. I was trying to
tips, because people listening, listening will go, yeah, absolutely. I find that really a real challenge, kind of getting senior leadership to listen. And what tricks and tips have you got that people could try?
I think one is it's really putting on the perspective of their agenda. So the same way as the capability, it's not used for me to say, I have to improve data skills across the organization. It's about, well, you said that in order for you to deliver the piece of transformation, you have identified that there are data gaps. Brilliant. Let me help you. So it's your agenda. It's not mine. And working with that, I found that really helps. The second is that alignment. When you have so many choices to do things, why would you choose that particular one, or why will you shape that initiative in that particular way? Well, it's because it aligns, it helps with that direction. That's quite important. And I think the third one is, in terms of tips, being really curious and constantly learning and experimenting and playing around with things. Like I realized the other day, for example, that I've been playing with ChatGPT since 2023. So that is 2 full years, just because I like playing with, things and, curious and learning. So you have to really keep that curiosity alive when you're in OD, because frameworks around, I don't know, systems thinking, service design, human-centric design, there are a lot of tools there that really help you when you're trying to do large group interventions with OD, when you try to design something around dynamics and power. You wouldn't normally maybe not go there, but if you start exploring that area, so how does systems change happen? How does system innovation, how that cross with service design, human-centered design? What type of tools could I get from that richness around facilitation, which is a critical element of that, to bring into my practice as a OD practitioner. So that's what I would really encourage people to do, to really be open, and you never know exactly where you're going to find that missing piece that will help you design something in a particular way.
Yeah. And one question I wanted to ask, and it's something that we see quite a lot because we get called into organizations and sometimes they are really purpose driven. The mission is really clear. They're doing very important work, but teams do lose their way a little bit. They get kind of caught within themselves and maybe sometimes, so you can't necessarily, even if you have the strongest of purposes, you can't assume that they'll be connected to it as well. How do you make sure that people are connected to the purpose and the mission as well? Because again, that's something that organizations on the whole could do a lot better, isn't it?
I think I find that normally what happens is teams are connected with their own interpretation of that purpose and mission, because the organization may have not put enough emphasis on really clarifying that mission or how they believe the organization is best placed to achieve that mission, which means that then teams do that interpretation themselves. So it's not so much that they're going on the way, is the organization has enabled them to translate that into their own language. And then there they go. And then the organization complains. Well, there's a gap. If you're not closing that gap, they are going to do it. I have a bit of a way to explain that with a 3-circle model. So imagine 3 circles. So you have the small one, medium one, and the large one. So on the large one on the outside, that is your organization. Yeah. The organization could be the whole organization, or it can be one of your directorates. That is where strategy happens. Yeah. That is where they decide the direction. Now, organizations are an abstract concept. They don't really exist, isn't it? You decide to group different work in a particular way, and that's what gives you an organization. So then the work to achieve that strategy doesn't happen on that outer circle. It happens in the middle one, which are your teams. That's where the work happens. That's where you start delivering what you've decided as a strategy, isn't it? So what you need to make sure is that the work those teams do aligned to that outer circle. But again, teams are another abstract concept. They don't really exist. They are made of individuals. So therefore, in order to ensure that your teams work the way you need them to work to achieve their strategy, you have to ensure that the individuals in that team understand the direction, understand the behaviors they're expected to demonstrate, how they are supposed to do the work. So then the teams perform in the expected way with the ways of working that the organization has defined to deliver the strategy. So in terms of helping those teams, etc., you have to look at your 3 circles and you need to identify at what point the things are not aligning. Is it between the outer circle, the strategy, and the team? Is it between the team and the individual? Is it between the individual and the bigger circle? And once you're able to identify where the misalignment is happening, then you can target your work.
These things are too important to be left to chance, aren't they? And it's about designing with intention and understanding where to focus. You can't do everything, can you? It's like, where's the sort of potential areas of focus that can really sort of connect the system in the right place as well. What do you enjoy most about your role? It's such a big role, isn't it? There's so many different facets to it. What kind of brings you joy?
I love working on that space, on that intersection between the strategy and people and processes, where you need to have your head in the cloud, but your feet firmly on the ground, because you need to be able to think about possibilities and potential. Like cancer research. Cancer research is a hugely successful organization. They were before I joined. They weren't waiting for me to be successful, okay? They were. They don't need me in that sense. But there is something I can contribute to try to get to the purpose a bit quicker, a bit faster, a bit better. So that potential, that possibilities, that's what the head in the cloud is. But at the same time, you have to be firmly grounded where the organization is and identify, sift through all those potentials and opportunities. Which one could make the biggest difference now, here? What are some of those pain points? What are some of the things that you could really start shifting? So working in that space really motivates me. Anybody that has worked with me ever will tell you that I am rubbish at delivery. Okay, do not count on me, like to get things done on time, things like that. Because I prefer the exploration, the discovery, the possibility. That sounds great, but what if? Yeah, and then surrounding myself with incredibly capable individuals that can take that madness and then make it happen and deliver.
Fabulous. And when you look at the kind of field of OD at the moment, is there anything particularly interesting you in terms of how it's developing? Or
So I believe it's going through a similar shift that, for example, the L&D field went through. So there was a particular time where L&D started to shift from your role is to create content towards your role is to curate and then sell the content, making sure that people can access it, can have the impact, because it's not about creating anymore. I think with OD, we're starting to get there. There has been quite a bit of development in terms of the theory, what OD is, what is not. Sometimes I feel we spend a little bit too much time doing that. But anyway, I think it's now getting to that point where things are mature enough to start thinking about what's the contribution that it needs to be to the organization, and not so much the individual practitioners, because sometimes OD focuses a lot on the individual practitioners, but more around what is the OD contribution at organizational system level and how it needs to operate at that. So that is a very interesting shift that I'm starting to see, that I'm really interested in. The other one is, how can OD support organizations with that flexibility, adaptability, with getting quicker at reacting and adapting? We are saying with Gen AI, you can't do anything these days without talking about Gen AI. Here I am talking about Gen AI because it's everywhere. So for me, it's not so much about the technical side of the training around how to use Copilot or ChatGPT. Is what are the critical conditions that need to exist in organization for that Gen AI to be fully embedded. I was reading a very interesting article the other day saying that the two main barriers that are stopping organizations for fully embracing Gen AI were failure to innovate and failure to scale. Those two things are firmly in the audio space. People that say, oh, I don't know about Gen AI because I don't have technology background. You don't need it. In OD, we can really work with organizations and support them to identify barriers to innovation and barriers to scale up. So that's very exciting. Let's see if we can step up to the challenge.
So we've talked about what brings you joy in kind of in the work you do. What do you find most challenging?
Well, I mentioned the delivery bit. You actually have to make things happen. It's that working with the teams to put in place the right roadmaps, the right impact measurements, and then monitoring that performance. Because some of the OD interventions we put in place can feel quite high level or quite elusive. So how do you know if they're having the right impact? How do you know you're going? Because if you're going to invest 18 months on doing something, you can't wait 18 months to know if you're in the right track or not. So that is a challenge to build that capability to help teams understand that just because it's OD doesn't mean that you cannot be rigorous about your performance and your monitoring and your impact. The other bit is that attention to senior leadership in a world where there is so much pressure and being a senior leader is becoming even more complicated than it ever was. Getting enough airtime with them to have those deep, difficult conversations to the level you need. It is a challenge. It is a challenge. You're always competing with other priorities. So that's challenging.
When you look back at your career, what are some of the key lessons you've learned so far?
First one is a leader is always a work in progress. If you ever find yourself in a point that you feel, I did it, I go there, then you're very wrong, because something's going to come and it's going to drop you out of your horse and make you feel very, very humble again. So that's it. Second is, yes, you learn much more from your mistakes than from things that have gone well. But you need to be able to embrace those mistakes and really learn and then make sure that you apply that learning. that organization that I mentioned, that leadership organization that I joined, there was one year I was the national president of the organization in Spain. I can't tell you the number of mistakes I made that year, like huge ones. And I learned so much. Was it painful? Yes, it was. But it really allowed me to grow and to develop and to understand my leadership style, my strengths, but also the areas where I really needed help and support to continue developing. So I think that's another lesson. And the third one is, and it's linked to the first one about that work in progress, because change, things evolving, context changing so quickly, you really need to keep learning. So that curiosity and focus on continuous learning is absolutely critical. Being a leader or not, like, that doesn't matter. You have to. Now, some individuals sometimes say, I don't want to progress in my career. I just want to continue doing my job. What they don't understand is that job is probably not going to exist in the current format in 6 months of a year. So even to stand still doing what you're currently doing, you have to learn. There's no other possibility. So that is a very important lesson that I try to continue.
Humility is such an important element of this, isn't it? Always learning, and there's always, and it's how you go with it as well. And talk on the subject of learning and development. You're an intensely busy senior leader. You've actually granted us some time, literally just about 48 hours before your summer holiday. So thank you for that. How do you make time for your own learning and development? How do you keep sharp and sharpening your skills?
One is, you have to consider that learning and development is part of your job. It can't be an addition, or I'll do that on my spare time, or it has to be part of your job. And there are many different ways you can do that. One is to be really reflective on your practice. So you are constantly evaluating and assessing what went well, what didn't, what could have done differently. So that reflective is absolutely critical. When you react to something, why did I react to that in that way? Why did it bother me so much that somebody that said this or that? Well, it's because my beliefs are these ones, therefore this is my reaction. So you have to embed that in your normal practice. Reading articles, podcasts, conferences, try to embed them as much as possible during your working day. Sometimes I encourage people, just block 2 blocks of time in your calendar. The first one is your preferred time for learning, even if it's an hour, 30 minutes. But what you do is you have a backup block, because if something very urgent happens on that block and you have to, you still have the second one. Now, don't touch the second one. Now, if you don't need to use the second one, brilliant, you have some time to think, etc. But do that, like, build the practice of putting that learning. And then I love reading and exploring, which means that my middle son, he's football crazy. So I spent a lot of time of my week driving here to training, to matches, and like hours. And he's reached now the age where I don't need to be in the pitch. I can be in my car. I do a lot of reading in the car while he's training football. Just, going through LinkedIn and exploring one resource, and then that takes me to the next one. And then I go and look for a free course or a book I can read or a person I can speak with. So it is a muscle, and you constantly, I think that's the only muscle I exercise this day, but it's a muscle that I continue working on.
Of those kind of resources, are there any particular books or podcasts that have really stuck with you that you would recommend to other people?
So I'll say in terms of book, you've got the kind of the Organizational Development Practitioner Guide from Linda Holbeck and Mian. Absolutely essential. I think, like, it's such a strong foundation. And what I really like about that book is both Linda and Mian brought very different perspectives. So Linda, the focus on the organization, and Mian, the focus on the practitioner. So you have those two sides to work with. I found it fascinating. Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. Brilliant as an introduction to system thinking. It's called a primer, because it's not too much in detail, but it really helps you understand the main concepts. In the area of system thinking, there is a book, it's not specifically for OD, but I found it fascinating, which is Guns, Germs and Steel by Jared Diamond. What it does, it talks about like evolution of societies and why certain societies evolved in a certain way. And it wasn't so much, about the capability or intellect of certain societies. It was actually about context, and it was about access to plants and animals. So they got more viruses. So when they went to another country, they took all those viruses and killed all that native population, and etc. But it's fascinating, and it really helps you think about that systems and interdependencies and non-linearity of how events work. It's fantastic. There is a person I follow on LinkedIn, and I find him fascinated. His name is Robert Meza. His consultancy is Aim for Behavior. And why I follow him and I find him fascinating is because he is so generous with the resources he shares around behavioral change and linking to design and etc. And is such a good resource to introduce to the concept of behavioral change and what it means and how do you bring rigor to it. Further than the typical nudging, like I'm going to set nudges. Well, there's a little bit more to behavioral change to that. So I think is a fantastic resource.
Brilliant. What a great set of resources. I've definitely written down a couple of those for my holiday in a couple of weeks' time as well. Thank you for that.
I have one more. And I think this one really, and it's linked with the whole about continuous learning and curiosity. And that was 100 Years by Linda Gratton, 100 Years Life by Linda Gratton. Fascinating book that explains that the old model of education, work, retirement is not here anymore. And therefore, the way you need to face that 100-year life is going to be very different. And it's probably going to be education, work, and then pause, and then some more education. And that the concept of retirement as we understood it is completely changing and evolving, and what it means for organizations, but also for individuals. It's another fantastic book.
And she's very much on our target list of potential guests. If Linda, if you're watching and you want to sell some more books, come on, come on the podcast. Brilliant. And one of the original missions of the podcast is to inspire the next generation of organization development or design practitioners coming through. And I think one of the things that we've learned is that people come from all sorts of different fields, and that's what adds to the richness of the profession as well. But what advice would you give to someone who's just considering the beginning a career in organization development or just taking their first steps?
Organizational development. In order to be a good organizational development practitioner, you need to understand all those organizational levers, how they work, and how can you shape them, how can you design them. And when I'm talking about levers, I'm talking about from your management and leadership frameworks to your capabilities, learning development, to your change behaviors. All that will then make that culture, less of culture, but also a little bit around your processes and systems. And when I talk of systems, it's not technologies, your management systems, your control systems, your decision-making systems. Yeah, those bits that support your organization. You need to be able to understand all of them and to identify which ones you're going to need to pull at any given time for that development. You can't be a successful organizational development practitioner by narrowing your field of practice. That is not going to help you. It may feel a little bit daunting. I always say, how do you eat an elephant? Bite by bite. That's what you do. You keep your balance between, developing your craft and your art as a practitioner, because it's a craft and art. And at the same time, you keep building your toolbox. So you do a little bit around learning and development, around management and leadership, about culture change, behavior change, and you keep adding to your toolbox. You don't have to do it all at once, but you definitely need to build your toolbox as much as possible.
Maria, we want to say huge thank you. It's been a really brilliant interview. It's just brilliant when we bring people on the podcast that are making meaningful or significant change in their organizations, and you've shared so many brilliant insights. Danny, what are you taking away from today's conversation?
So I think this is going to be an episode that people are really going to enjoy and take a lot away from, because it's been really practical and grounded in kind of organisational reality. So I really enjoyed the way you spoke about the OD role as that translator of strategy. That's really important. It's going to stick with me. If you're doing something for an immediate need, then you're 18 months too late. So that idea of just planning ahead. I really like the 3 kind of level framework you talked about with capability building, the practices, the skills, and the conditions, and the backup time block for learning and development. Having 2 blocks in your diary if the first one gets used up, I think that would be really valuable for lots of people to apply when they're trying to create time for important stuff.
And for me, we have a little marker button. So whenever we hear really great stuff, I hit the marker button so I can edit it and find it again easily. There's so much stuff, and ditto to all of what Danny said. And I guess just building on some of those things, just reminding the importance of creating the conditions for the change to happen. I think sometimes we get so caught up on the skills and the intervention and all that, but it's the conditions that it works. And also, I love that saying, keep your head in the clouds, but your feet on the ground. I think that's really sage advice to everyone as well. So Mary, I want to say huge thank you. If people want to follow your work or keep up to date with your sort of latest thinking, what's the best way for people to follow your work?
Well, if they follow in LinkedIn, they can, send me messages and we can connect there. Absolutely.
Well, Maria, it's been brilliant. So if you are watching this and you think, I know someone would really benefit from this, then please do share the podcast. We get so many shares every week, and it's people sort of thinking, I know someone who could really benefit from someone like Maria's well-earned professional insights as well. Then please do. Podcast is growing every single week. If you have enjoyed it, then please hit the like button and subscribe, because the algorithm gods love it. But most importantly, Maria, thank you so much. It's the week before your holiday, the really intense one where you're just trying to clear the decks, and you've made time for us and you've made time for the profession as well. So on behalf of the OD profession, I just want to say a huge thank you. You've been really generous and been really excellent with all your insights. So thank you.
Thanks to you too. It was brilliant to be part of this.
Excited to have you with us.